Last time on Anime in the Real World. From humble beginnings through disaster and war, we saw the first steps anime took into adolescence. Now let's see how it matures. My name is Mark-Eric Seebon. Come with me as I travel across Japan to better understand the culture that created this unique art form and to understand how anime changed Japan and the world. Here on Anime in the Real World. There are two factors that make the years 1960 to 1990 anime's first golden age. In this era, we see the beginnings of solely Japanese-born genres. The first mech, magical girl, cyberpunk, and slice-of-life animes began during these years. This is also the era that anime was first brought to America, dubbed and broadcast, and introduced a whole new audience. It all started with the very first two broadcast animes. In 1961, the now lost Instant History was the first primetime broadcast television anime. The show told the story of historical events in a humorous way, all under 3 minutes. 2 years later, the 15-minute show Hermit Village became the first late-night broadcast television anime. The story follows the romantic escapades of an ancient Chinese alchemist in training. In the 1960s, all of anime's firsts were being made by two animation companies, Toei Animation and Mushi Production, and their battlefield was the English language. Toei made the first move in 1960 with the movie Alakazam the Great. This movie is based on the 16th century story Journey to the West, and was the first ever anime to be dubbed into English. But Mushi quickly countered in January 1963 with the release of one of anime's keystone programs, Astro Boy. 6 months after it premiered, it was dubbed into English, and the first generation of American otakus were born. Then Mushi hit again with the first all-color anime television show, Kimba the White Lion. The rivalry between Toei and Mushi began in 1961 when Mushi's founder's contract with Toei ended. Not being renewed, Osamu Tezuka started his own animation studio. A studio that, despite early financial issues, is still producing animes today. Away from the competition of these two studios, the 1960s was a time for new genres of anime. Gigantor was the first real robot mecha. The Eighth Man was the first cyborg superhero. Sally the Witch was the first magical girl. Speed Racer was the first racing anime. And The Star of the Giants was the first sports anime. As the 60s came to an end, it wasn't the first television broadcast anime or the first color anime that would be remembered. It was the first adult-themed anime and the beginning of the end of a successful studio that this decade would be remembered for. The beginnings of the 1970s started with the same rivalry between Toei Animation and Mushi Production. Although both studios still exist today, one of them almost shut down forever, and it was all because of a mix of money and sex. But it's not what you think. The downfall of Mushi Production began with Osamu Tezuka's decision to reduce the amount of money going into the production process of writing, animating, filming, and moving into outbidding other studios for new stories to produce. It's not like they didn't have the money thanks to the success of their original concept animes like Astro Boy and Kimba the White Lion. But once Tezuka stepped down in 1968, the company seems to have gone in a new direction. The next problem arose with a group of animes Mushi chose to produce during this decade. They were called the Anime-Rama Film Collection, and these three movies are considered the first pink films and the first hentai. A Thousand and One Nights in 1969, Cleopatra in 1970, and Belladonna of Sadness in 1973 were all commercial failures in Japan and America. Received so badly that people walked out of the theaters and demanded their money back. Even the English dubbed and subbed versions of Cleopatra have gone missing and now are considered lost media. The financial failure of Mushe Productions led it to file bankruptcy in 1973. But because of its downfall, we were able to get 5 new studios: Tezuka Productions, Madhouse, Sunrise, Pierrot, and Kyoto Animation. But Mushe's death certificate wasn't written yet. In 1977, the studio rose from its financial ashes and the new Mushe production was reborn and is still producing anime today. But this decade had more hidden up its sleeves for us otakus around the world. The 1970s saw a shift from anime dominating the large screen to dominating the small screen. By the end of the decade, over 50 animes were being transmitted to TVs all over Japan. But Japan was not the only market anime was being sold in. Europe was taking notice of anime, and they were loving it. The age-old question of the chicken and the egg has to be asked at this point. Was it the need for animes focused towards children that led to the production of European-themed animes, or was it the positive response from Europe that led to anime productions of European-themed stories? The truth probably lies somewhere in the middle, but no matter the reason, we were given the gift of the World Masterpiece Theater, a showcase series that retold European and American literary classics, all in the anime style. Airing from 1969 to 1997, the World Masterpiece Theater became an anime mainstay every Sunday at 7:30 p.m. So beloved was this series that Nippon Animation brought it back in 2007 and it remained on air until 2009. But the legacy of the World Masterpiece Theater has another layer to it. It was a series that gave one of anime's dons his start, Hayao Miyazaki. But what the 70s is probably best known for is sci-fi. With the first Star Wars movie hitting the big screens in 1977, and the syndication of the original Star Trek series coming back to TV at the beginning of the decade, the world was in love with sci-fi, and anime followed this trend. Space Battleship Yamato became the first anime space opera in 1974, and Mobile Suit Gundam became the first super robot mecha in 1979. These two series were so beloved by audiences in Japan and in America that their stories are still being renewed and added to today. Anime sci-fi might have had its birth in the 1970s, but what was coming up for the 1980s? Well, you better buckle up. The fast-paced 80s was still in love with sci-fi, with the last original Star Wars movie, Return of the Jedi, and the new Star Trek The Next Generation series fueling this passion. Anime was right there with them. But what anime had to offer would be so groundbreaking that it created a whole new subgenre of sci-fi: cyberpunk. Akira is a mind-bending movie that broke new grounds for anime, and many movie critics claim it to be one of the best sci-fi movies ever made. Unfortunately, Akira was not a success in Japan. With a budget of over 1 billion yen to make, it was the most expensive anime movie at its time, and it didn't even come close to recouping its production cost. That was until it came to America. In 1989, we got to see the cyberpunk epic on the big screen and on VHS. The home movie sales alone brought in over $80 million US. It was clear that this sci-fi subgenre had a future. Although Akira can't take the honor of the first cyberpunk movie, that honor goes to Blade Runner, which hit the theaters on June 25th, 1982, 6 months before the Akira manga hit bookstore shelves. But what Akira did for the movie industry and for anime overshadows its lackluster beginnings. Cyberpunk wasn't the only genre to be developed in the 80s. The slice-of-life anime made its first appearance on TV screens during this decade as well. High School Kimigumi is the story of a group of students who make a school club and have many adventures together. Although a simple premise, this anime set the course for many fan-favorite animes to come. And in the 80s, it was the fans that found their voice. Beginning in July 1978, the magazine Animangi gave the new subculture of the otaku a place to learn about the new animes that were coming out and read a new manga between its pages. Then in March 1985, new type added to the anime magazine world giving the otakus another source for their anime and manga news. But anime on the big and small screen and mangas in magazines was not the only place where otakus could get their fill. On April of 1980, the Tato Corporation released the very first arcade cabinet, anime-themed video game, Lupin III: Rupin Sensei. This stealth-based arcade game led the way for anime to be played on cartridges, to discs, to mobile apps all over the world. But it isn't the cyberpunk or the slice-of-life animes, nor is it the magazines and video games that the 1980s would be remembered for. The 1980s will go down in history because of the rise of one anime company. The 1980s is the story of Studio Ghibli. But the story of Studio Ghibli doesn't start with its founding. We have to go back to the 1970s and go to Nippon Animation to start this story. Already having a well-established career dating back to 1963 with Toei Animation, Miyazaki started to make himself known when he became the lead animator for Nippon Animation on the World Masterpiece Theater in the early 1970s. A few years later, he got his director credits when he directed his first TV series, Future Boy Conan, in 1978. Then a year later, Miyazaki directed his first feature film, Lupin III: The Castle of Cagliostro. When Toshio Suzukiyan, the editor of Animagi magazine, saw the Lupin III movie, he was impressed. Suzukiyan wanted Miyazaki to work for the magazine, and lucky for us, he did. From 1982 to 1994, Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind was serialized in Animagi. Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind was so popular that it didn't take much convincing on Suzukiyan's part to get Miyazaki to start a movie adaptation. And in March of 1984, with the help of Topcraft Animation, now Disney Japan, and Toei Animation, we got to see Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind on the big screen. Since neither of them owned a studio, Suzukiyan and Miyazaki had to go out and find one, and it was during this time they found the third member of the founding group of Studio Ghibli. Working with him in the past, the pair convinced Isao Takahata to produce the movie. He was reluctant to do so at first, but it turned out to be one of the best decisions of his life. Thanks to the success of Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, the three of them, with the help of the entrepreneur Yasushi Takuma, founded the world-renowned Studio Ghibli. And in 1986, Castle in the Sky premiered as Studio Ghibli's first official movie. For over 3 decades, Studio Ghibli has produced some of the most visually stunning, thought-provoking, laugh-inducing, and heart-wrenching stories. As Chaucer wrote, all good things must come to an end, and anime's first golden age had come to its end. Next time on Anime in the Real World, the final chapter in the history of anime, how an economic crash nearly ended the industry, and how free thinkers brought anime back from the ashes.